As we talk about the celebrity murder for hire case of rapper Lil Durk, it is time to get the perspective of an attorney who knows about high-profile clients and trials, Ben Chew, the man who famously represented Johnny Depp. We're going to get his perspective on the details and evidence. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We're still breaking down the legal developments for rapper Lil Durk, real name Durk Banks. The 32-year-old Grammy Award-winning Chicago hip-hop star has been arrested on a federal charge out of California of conspiracy to murder a rap rival named Quando Rando. Because it was back in August of 2022 out in Los Angeles when a shooting took place at a gas station near the Beverly Center shopping mall. And while Rondo, who prosecutors say was the intended target of this hit, he wasn't injured. But sadly, his cousin, Savannah Robinson, was gunned down. Now, prosecutors allege that Banks is the leader of a rap collective known as Only the Family, or OTF, but really they say it's a criminal organization. It's a criminal organization that engages in murder and assault, and that he was the one who put into motion this attempted assassination by putting a bounty on Rondo's life. Now, you might be saying, why? Well, because prosecutors say this all stemmed from the 2020 murder of Banks' friend and fellow rapper King Von, who was gunned down outside of a hookah shop in Atlanta. And prosecutors say that it was Banks who blamed Quando Rando for this. Banks allegedly not only ordered this hit, but the hitmen were reportedly or allegedly funded through Banks and OTF-related finances. They say that an OTF member and close associate of Mr. Banks coordinated and paid for 5 co-conspirators to travel from Chicago to California for this murder. In fact, prosecutors say, we have a message from Banks to a co-conspirator that reads, "Don't book no flights under no names involved with me." We're going to talk about that. And prosecutors also say that the hitmen, they traveled to California, that Banks also took a private jet to California too, that he himself was accompanied by co-conspirator Kavan London Grant. And by the way, when we talk about Grant, prosecutors say he was the one that bought the ski masks for the attack, that he used Banks' credit card to pay for the team's hotel room in California. And prosecutors allege that several OTF members and associates, they used cars to track and follow Quando Rando on the day of the shooting, which prosecutors say, guess what? We have this captured on traffic camera and surveillance footage. Now, in addition to Grant, 4 other men have been indicted in this murder for hire plot. There's DeAndre Dontrell Wilson, Keith Jones, David Brian Lindsay, and Asa Houston. They have been hit with conspiracy, murder for hire, and firearms charges. And after these arrests, the feds say they arrested Mr. Banks after they learned he had booked 3 international flights scheduled to leave the United States, that they took him into custody near the Miami airport. And I should tell you, if convicted, Banks and the 5 defendants charged in this separate indictment, they each would face a statutory maximum sentence of life in federal prison. So the stakes couldn't be higher with what we're talking about. By the way, what do I talk about all the time here on Sidebar? I talk about the law, right? Makes sense. Law and crime sidebar. I talk about legal rulings. I talk about legal decisions. But I have one for you right now that is a landmark one that has changed things in a very big way. Why? Because you can now legally trade on who will win the 2024 election. Yes, this is legal, and that's because our sponsor of Sidebar, Kalshi, went to court and won legal approval for election trading for the first time in over 100 years. So not only can you essentially bet on the 2024 presidential election, but with Kalshi, you can bet on who will control the House and Senate, who will win the swing states. Pretty timely. What's happening next week, right? And it's not just politics. You can bet on other future events too, like will Taylor Swift win top artist on Spotify this year? What's going to be the Rotten Tomatoes scores for upcoming movies like Gladiator 2? I actually think it's going to be above 85% personally. I think it's going to do great, but there's so much more and you're going to be like, wow, I can trade on that? This is the only place to trade on events like this in all 50 states. And you can sign up right now using our link kalshi.com/sidebar or scan the QR code on screen. And if you're one of the first 500 traders who deposit $100, Kalshi will give you a free $20 credit. That's kalshi.com/sidebar. I've set the stage. I've talked about the players. Now I got to bring in a special guest. I am joined by renowned trial attorney Ben Chew, who famously represented Johnny Depp in his case against Amber Heard. He knows a thing or two about high-profile cases, high-profile defendants. Ben, so good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. We have this rapper. We have Lil Durk, the Chicago rapper, topped the Billboard 200 list, collaborated with artists like Drake, J. Cole, Justin Bieber. He won a Grammy. Talk to me about the challenges of representing such a high-profile defendant like this.
Jesse, great to be with you again. The challenges in this case in particular are going to be especially hard in light of the circumstantial and other evidence that you have described. But whenever you're representing somebody of Lil Durk's status, you're concerned primarily with the criminal charges, but you're also concerned with his brand, which also is at stake in such a high-profile matter.
Would this necessarily hurt his brand? Because I did a separate Sidebar episode about this, where I had a guest on who talked about there was apparently or seemingly this ongoing feud between Quando Rando, and there's Lil Durk, and there's King Von, and there's NBA Youngboy, and whether viewers and listeners of this music were kind of egging this on in a way. That was the allegation or something that he had been suggesting. And I wonder if this kind of allegation about trying to carry out a hit of your alleged rival, would that hurt his brand so much? I don't know.
You know, Jesse, that's such a great question. And in some corners, it might help his reputation as being, a tough guy. But then as the representative, you have to look at a higher concern, which is his personal liberty. I mean, I suppose in some ways the best outcome for him is if he were to be completely acquitted, but he still had the patina of being, involved in this kind of rivalry. But I think as the lawyer, as you pointed out, you have to be primarily concerned about keeping his liberty.
Would it be tough for you, or is it tough for any defense attorney to represent a high-profile defendant? Because the spotlight gets put on the legal counsel, too. I mean, we're talking about the same thing in the Sean Diddy Combs case. So much has been talked about his lawyers. Talk to me about if that's difficult for the lawyer in a situation like this.
To keep his eyes on the prize, which is you have to think about your client. You can't think about yourself. And there are some celebrity lawyers we've seen who like the limelight too much. Some who have even gotten their clients sued based on what they've said publicly, because some people forget that lawyers can be sued for defamation as well. So you just have to think about your client's interests first, and yours should not enter into it.
It's a good point. It's a good point. And by the way, and we're going to get into this I question right now how strong the evidence is against Lil Durk. I'll talk about that in a second, but sometimes, I think you would agree, a celebrity can be in a little bit of a different position, right? And why do I say that? Because TMZ is reporting that while Lil Durk is currently locked up in Miami, he's awaiting extradition to California, he is, quote, in great spirits, that he's getting along well with not only the staff, but fellow detainees. Talk to me about that. The idea of a celebrity, and we've talked about this with, with Sean Combs being locked up in the Metropolitan Detention Center. He seems to be in that case, I think he's more under isolated containment. I don't think he has much interaction with the other inmates, or the other detainees, I should say. But, being a celebrity in this situation might be a little bit different.
Yeah, it might be, because they're in certain circles, celebrities are very popular. They tend to be popular in LA before LA juries, which is where this case is going to be tried. So that's significant. And he obviously is charismatic, and that can be something that can be a quality if he does testify at trial that could be very much in his favor. The fact that he seems to be in a good mood suggests that you may well be right, that the evidence against him it may be weak. And we have to always remember, as you do and your sophisticated viewers do, that there's a presumption of innocence here, and that the similarities with some other cases don't mean that he is necessarily responsible in this case.
When we talk about the difference between federal and state cases defending a client like this, what's the main difference? Is it more difficult to defend a client in a federal case than a state case?
Generally speaking, I think it is because the profile is a bit higher. The resources the feds have at their disposal tend to be higher. I think in this case, it's such a high profile case that even if it were a state prosecution, they would probably throw their best people and most resources into it. So this is going to be a significant challenge to him.
And I'm not making light of what happened. I mean, this was a shootout in broad daylight at a gas station. I can't emphasize this enough. When you're talking about gunfire near gas pumps, what could have also resulted, but it was a brazen attack and someone lost their life, and it's a really sad situation. And the last thing that you want to see is if this really was committed by Lil Durk, is this back and forth and beefs and people getting gunned down. It's such a shame because you're dealing with human life, you're dealing with tragedy, and you're also dealing with incredible talent who you just want them to continue making music and providing good for the culture and not allegedly engaging in this. But that's a side question. What do you think about the evidence against him specifically? I think I can make the argument that maybe the evidence of everything else, the surveillance, the records, might be pretty strong against his co-defendants. What about him specifically? How strong is the evidence against him?
From what I've read, they may be pulling some punches here, but a lot of it seems to be circumstantial. That things were charged to his credit card. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that Lil Durk had any idea, A, that his credit card was being used, B, for what purpose it was being used. It would not be unusual, I would think, for someone in his position to pay for somebody's travel, to pay for certain expenses, to let a certain number of people in his entourage use his credit card. I don't think that's particularly unusual or incriminating. I think the challenge for the prosecutors will be to tie that specifically to this case. I mean, there was one mention where he apparently said, "Hey, don't tie your travel expenses to me." But it seems to me that in and of itself is not, and I hate to use the pun, that a smoking gun. I think they need something more incriminating than that.
So the alleged message from Lil Durk's phone to a co-conspirator was, "Don't book no flights under no names in vault with me." You could see how prosecutors would say, "Oh my gosh, he's attached to this. He's trying to make sure that he's not connected to this, that there's no evidence tying back to him." But isn't another way to look at it, hey, whatever you guys are about to do, I don't want to have any part of it whatsoever. That could be maybe an alternative explanation.
No, Jesse, I think that's absolutely right. And unlike some other cases that we've discussed where in Diddy, for example, we've discussed whether Diddy really has to testify in light of the video. I don't see anything like that necessarily would require him, from what we know now, to testify. So that would mean that the government would really be put to the proof. And that stray comment in and of itself, I don't think gets the government to beyond a reasonable doubt.
I do wonder if there are cooperating co-conspirators that are working with the government. Why do I say that? Well, the indictment against those 5 individuals also lays out 5 unnamed co-conspirators. One of them, I believe, is Lil Durk. But the other ones, I mean, unless you saw something different, we're not entirely sure who they are. But a part of me wonders if the information that the prosecutors are building their case on might have only come from the co-conspirators. For example, the indictment says that the defendants and co-conspirator 2 were at a hamburger restaurant where they discussed the payment for the murder. How would you know that? I don't know if the surveillance cameras in this hamburger restaurant can pick up the audio conversation, but it makes me wonder if one of these people was cooperating with the government and said, "Yeah, I'll tell you what this conversation was about." Am I totally off?
No, I think that's a great point, and that obviously changes the calculus. And then his lawyers would be left to argue, well, you got a deal only because you were willing to testify. You were unindicted because you were willing to give what his lawyers would say would be false witness against Lil Durk. But that's not as strong a position obviously, as it would have been if there were not people on the inside testifying against him. That puts him in a much more precarious position, and I think it's a very reasonable interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, he's not he's not at that shooting. He's not at that gas station. There doesn't seem to be, maybe as of yet, records that he was actually making purchases, but that if he put the thing in motion. So I wonder how much the government needs a key witness to say, no, Lil Durk directed us to do this, he said this. They need that kind of witness to put him at the top of this criminal organization, the mastermind behind this murder for hire plot, because even looking at the surveillance, even looking at the credit card statements, even looking at the travel records, I don't know. And obviously the feds probably have a lot more evidence than they don't have to reveal in an indictment or a criminal complaint. But it just feels to me that they might need someone on the inside to connect him.
I think you're exactly right. And maybe they have that person, because the fact that they've indicted him in a very high profile case, they have to know that careers are on the line and they're being watched. So I think your theory makes a lot of sense. It probably makes the most sense.
Well, one of the things that's getting a lot of attention, and one of the things that prosecutors will use, A, probably to say he doesn't deserve bail and he shouldn't get a pretrial release, but B, what they would say builds up their case against him, is that he allegedly was fleeing the country. So in Lil Durk's criminal complaint, it says that the FBI received notifications from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, showing that Banks had been booked as a passenger on 2 international flights, a one-way flight from Miami to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, connecting through Doha, Qatar, scheduled to depart the evening of October 24th, and a one-way flight from Fort Lauderdale to Switzerland, connecting via New Jersey, also scheduled to depart the evening of October 24th. They say Banks did not board either flight, but at approximately 6:40 p.m., the FBI received an additional CBP notification that Banks had been booked as a passenger on a private plane departing Miami and scheduled for Italy. And that was scheduled to depart at approximately 9 p.m. And at approximately 8 p.m., so the hour before that was supposed to take off, Banks was arrested by law enforcement in the vicinity of the departing airport. Talk to me about the multiple ways, the different ways you can look at that.
Yeah, I mean, the different ways are the fact that the first 2 tickets were one way suggests that he wasn't planning on coming back. Now, the explanation for that is he's a wealthy guy. His plans change. He's not like the rest of us who need to book round trip tickets to make it less expensive. He has access to private aircraft. But it is, it's circumstantial evidence, consciousness of guilt, intent to flee. And that's something that would be argued by both sides.
Bradford Cohen, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a renowned criminal defense attorney. He had such an interesting explanation for this. He said, well, what a lot of times you'll see clients do is they might know that they're about to be arrested. I mean, he knew maybe his co-defendants were about to be arrested. And sometimes what people will do when they think the feds are onto them, or authorities are onto them, they will book flights to see if they're flagged. And if they're flagged and they're red flagged, they know, oh, something's going on. I'm about to be arrested. I'm about to be indicted. Doesn't mean that they're going to take the flights. Doesn't mean that he was going to flee, but there could be another explanation for that. I thought that was fascinating, Ben.
That is fascinating. I'd never heard that, but it does make sense.
Yeah, because the government's not going to say, usually, right? The government's not going to say, hey, we're going to arrest you at 8 o'clock. I mean, there could be situations where you surrender. You might have an understanding of it, but that might be a way that he was trying to figure it out. I wanted to ask you one more. Yeah,
sure. I'm sorry.
No, Ben, please continue.
No, I was going to say, and there could be reasons other than his being having consciousnness of guilt for being concerned about being arrested, because obviously these are his associates, and it's not necessarily as incriminating as it might first appear.
Yeah. Or look the other way. Hey, my gosh, I'm innocent. They're going to come after me. This isn't good. I'm completely innocent. I'm taking off. I don't know. It's another explanation. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about this. So coded language, I think, is really, really interesting in criminal cases. I think it's really interesting in conspiracy cases or murder for hire cases. In the indictment, It reads, after the murder, co-conspirator 1 made clear in coded language that co-conspirator 1 would pay a bounty or monetary reward and or make payment to anyone who took part in killing TB. So let me ask you about that. It's interesting they say it's clear, but it's also coded language. How clear is coded language?
Well, that's going to be up for debate, and coded language, by definition, requires some kind of mechanism to decipher the code, and that would seem to open the way for reasonable doubt that it could have meant any number of alternative things, and it's the government's responsibility and burden to show that it is in fact clear.
Ben, before I let you go, one final thing. Whenever this case, if it goes to trial, when it goes to trial, you represent a celebrity at trial. What kind of jury do you want? Is it tough, the jury selection process in a celebrity trial?
The jury selection process is always extremely important. There are many lawyers, and you may be one, who thinks that the case is won or lost at voir dire. I'm not sure that's always true, but it's certainly important. I think in this case, he would want. I mean, I think Los Angeles is not a bad venue for him. It tends to be pretty pro-celebrity. So I know he was arrested in Broward County, but I think he's in a much better spot. Of course, California tends to be more lenient than Florida anyway, but I think he's not in a bad spot. I think he's going to want jurors of color. I think he's going to want people, if to the extent that he can divine this, people who like his music and people who follow popular culture generally. So I think that's what he's going to be looking for.
And that trial might not happen for a year, year and a half, 2 years. So we shall see. But Ben Chew, so good seeing you. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, Jesse. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.